you to not to be talking so that we can have him talk. Well, ladies and gentlemen, our next guest is Michael Shaw. And of course, his organization is freedomadvocates.org. And Michael lives here in Santa Cruz. 10 or 15 years ago, he bought some property that was zoned for multi-family development, and beautiful piece of land. He wanted to build a house and perhaps develop the land. And despite the fact that it was bought and sold under the idea of multi-family development, they wouldn't let him develop it. So Michael began getting interested in what was going on in the world and began studying Agenda 21. And today I would say that there's probably no person more informed about what's going on than the gentleman you're about to hear. His organization is here. He has a great deal of material, DVDs, and certainly books that you can get, pamphlets that he's written. But without further ado, my friend, Michael Shaw.
Well, thank you, Dr. Stan. It's wonderful to be back at Radio Liberty Conference, and I'm sure that everybody in the audience has the same reaction. Things are changing fast in our world, and that's why it is that we've got to begin to understand where the problems are coming from and what the nature of the problems that we face today truly are. Sun Tzu was an ancient Chinese military strategist. He continues to be studied in military schools around the world. In his Art of War thesis, he postulates that in order to win every battle, you must know yourself and you must know your enemy. Do we? America is in trouble, deep trouble. Not just because we are conducting several ineffective and unprovoked military invasions around the world. We are in our biggest trouble because we are being subjected to an internal war that is being conducted without the firing of a shot, as would be in a Cold War. The people of America have been misled. We have been ready to participate in a new global political and economic system where ordinary human beings are regarded as chattel. Do you want to be chattel? Or do you think that we, the people, can rise? I believe we can rise, and that is why I am here today. To help in the understanding of the trouble we're in, and to provide information on how you can take action locally to counter the globalist assault is why I am here today. Most of you are familiar with Agenda 21 Sustainable Development. I am not going to spend today providing another detailed analysis of this internationalist plan. Suffice it to say that the local action plan of Agenda 21 is now in full force in every county in America. Agenda 21 is the master plan adopted by modern political leaders, Democrats and Republicans, as controlling influences behind today's global monetary system direct our political, our academic, and our media institutions. It has been made easy for the centralized tyranny to advance, and advance it has. Agenda 21 activists are accomplishing their goal of abolishing private property through the implementation of these land use objectives. Smart growth and the Wildlands Project. They are also accomplishing their plan to educate the youth through school and social indoctrination into becoming global citizens. And finally, Agenda 21's fifth column is achieving its goal of increasing the use of technology in order to monitor and control our every action. This process will continue. Today, my specific goal is to identify elements of the global policy takeover in Santa Cruz and in the San Francisco Bay Area. I will give insights and present opportunities for furthering the establishment of viable defensive strategies in an effort to reestablish America. Let's start out with some examples right here in Santa Cruz. The transit corridor, in conjunction with the rail purchase and the various land use control devices, give us a more complete picture of how the globalist political assault is happening here in Santa Cruz. We see here the transit corridors plan. Notice the pictures. The transit corridor plans, this is their website, I didn't pick the pictures. It's all about bicycles and mass transit. The pretty words on this page are nothing but a pretty picture intending to fool us into falling into becoming bike riders as we abandon our autos. More than a decade, actually many decades of congestion here in Santa Cruz County has brought about the always planned for transit corridor plan. The plan is based upon walking, biking, and use of the newly acquired purchase by the Santa Cruz County by the Regional Transportation Commission of the 32-mile rail line that runs along our coast. For over 30 years, Santa Cruz County Transit Corridors Plan has been slowly implemented. Henry Baker, the Deputy Director of the Planning Department, circa 1972, told the Santa Cruz County Board of Supervisors that in order to gain the share of transit patronage, an astounding 30%, that they would have to bait people with a carrot and discipline them with a stick. Make it easy, he said, to use reliable service with improved scheduling, and it will become attractive to the people, meaning the bus service. But if that doesn't work, he said, make auto usage difficult and inconvenient. Permit road congestion to increase, unquote. Any of us who drive Highway 1 know that that mission has been successful. Now, the transit corridor plan, those of you who understand Agenda 21, you can see the 3 E's, their little emblem here, just typical sustainable development messaging for those who are following with enthusiasm their approach. Now, the Transit Corridors Plan will include provision for dense housing along the transit corridor and a minimum of 20 to 30 units per acre and no more. All this development has to occur within 1/2 mile of the transit centers. Now, we've been talking about Agenda 21 and its implementation here in Santa Cruz for a dozen years. Now you're going to see it come into steam at full force from the present Board of Supervisors. One goal, under the guise of reducing emissions, done in homage to the global warming hoax, is to deny us our use of our ability to be mobilely free. This is why they believe that they need to coerce us out of our cars. The Soquel Corridor Plan will add to this pressure as pedestrian, bicycle lanes, and other traffic calming techniques will make it far more consuming to drive your car from South County to Santa Cruz. This map, which shows Soquel Drive here in Aptos, downtown Aptos, through to Dominican Hospital. This is the Soquel Corridor Plan. The land around it is intended to be built with high-density housing. This road is to be dedicated for bicycles and public transportation. And this is what I thought the Soquel Corridor's plan was. This is the only map I had seen until a week ago. I had seen this map some time ago. But the Regional Transportation Committee, which puts these maps out, has added all of Live Oak to the Soquel Corridor plan, as well as some areas down here in Santa Cruz. So this concept of the corridor plan, that is mass transportation and stack 'em and pack housing, in full force is coming our way now. The discussion has been about the Aptos Community Center, along with the grocery store down here. But as you can see from this map, the plan is much more extensive than simply remaking Rio Del Mar Center. Another goal behind the Soquel Corridor is to build 3,300 dense housing units along Soquel Avenue, Mission Street, Water Street, and Ocean Street. Those are areas not even shown on this map. So the process of densifying with stack 'em and pack 'em housing is now coming out in full force, having been disclosed to us by our regional planning agencies, including the RTC. As you might expect, these plans have creepy-crawly ramifications. The plan does not focus solely on Soquel Drive, as I've explained, but encompasses Santa Cruz, Soquel Village, all of Seacliff, Aptos, the majority of Live Oak, and even areas in Watsonville. Now I'm going to talk about how your tax money is going to be used to force mass transportation upon you. So let's talk about the Santa Cruz rail purchase. How many people are familiar that 10 days ago the County of Santa Cruz purchased the rail line from Davenport to Watsonville? This recently acquired rail line came at a cost of $14.5 million. It was purchased by the Santa Cruz County Regional. We'll talk about regionalism later, but the key to all of this is regionalism. And just understand that Santa Cruz County, between AMBAG, the Association of Monterey Bay Area Governments, and the RTC, another federally funded, federally arranged agency controlling our lives here in Santa Cruz, is all about transforming the way we transport ourselves. They want you off Highway 1 and onto the rail. So here is the Santa Cruz County Regional Transportation Committee's map of the rail line. The yellow line here is the rail line recently acquired by our county government. You can see that it ties into a whole system of rail lines that are designed for Central California. And you may remember when the voters overwhelmingly rejected this same plan in the year 2004. What we learned from this is that Agenda 21 keeps coming back. You can defeat it here, you can defeat it there, but it keeps coming back until we've defeated it everywhere. And that's why the battle must not be relinquished. As part of the transportation corridor, the rail line was an essential purchase to further smart growth planning in Santa Cruz. Plans for the rail, including the high-speed rail in Gilroy, and is critical to the future of mass transportation across America, as indicated in this map from the organization America 2050. Now, these plans are the plans to take people. It goes to every metropolitan area in America that is anticipated to survive the Agenda 21 fallout. This is what will connect you to your relatives. You will not be taking your car across America's highways. If you want to travel, you go only to where they tell you to go, and you'll be doing it on this rail system. So the coordinated rail system being implemented across this country is all part and parcel of the same program. According to a report completed by the Egan Consulting Group, how many people have heard of that organization? Anybody? Well, watch for Egan Consulting Group. Let's talk a little bit about them. They have a plan to upgrade the segment of the Santa Cruz branch from Watsonville through Santa Cruz to Natural Bridges Drive. That plan has an estimated cost, according to its proponents, of $150 million. Now, we spent $15 million to buy the rail line. Celebrations are happening across Santa Cruz. It's going to cost $150 million to take the trestle down in my town of La Selva Beach, which is 100 years old and rotted. You can put your fist through the trestle. This thing's 100 feet tall. It's got to be rebuilt. All of them along the rail line have to be rebuilt. You know, this old trestle's not a rotten steel one like ours is, but this one, too, isn't going to support the passenger trains that they're anticipating. Again, according to Egan Consulting, converting the track to a Class 3 line, therefore allowing its use as a passenger train, is expected to cost a minimum of over $500,000 in annual maintenance. And that's coming from the lips of the proponents of the rail line. Did you ever see that in the Santa Cruz Sentinel? I didn't. Did you ever hear about that in any public statements coming from elected officials or from the RTC itself? No. You've got to dig into these thick books and find these facts. Little does the public know at this point, but they're about to learn a whole lot as the county of Santa Cruz is going to be remaking itself. Now, Eagle Consulting is a public-private partner that has contracted with the Regional Transportation Commission. They are also engaged in broad-scale sustainable development implementation all over Central California. The days of when Santa Cruz says, let Santa Cruz be weird and stand on its own, are long over. We are now part of, or the leading element of, Central California's Sustainable Development Agenda 21 remake. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about the Santa Cruz Land Trust. The elected officials in this county have made themselves notorious for the repeated and unrelenting attacks upon private property and private property owners. To defer the heat of these attacks, they have now partnered themselves with the Santa Cruz Land Trust for purposes of identifying the properties chosen for sustainable theft. Now, land trusts are sometimes considered indispensable partners for local planning departments. The Santa Cruz County Land Trust is becoming a front for the Santa Cruz County Planning Department. Here's a map from the Land Trust. These stars show a couple of things. According to the Land Trust, these areas with blue stars are private properties where access has been restricted in conformance with such things as conservation easements that have been acquired by the Land Trust, which keep the property owner's use of property very restricted. The purpose of this is to make sure that establishments are created that keep the public from accessing rural areas. The green spots are places already controlled by the Land Trust itself, where it says that it's open to public, but only limited access. We can expect these Land Trust properties to have that characterization for a while before it simply becomes lands off limits to ordinary people. That is the call under sustainable development. So private property in Santa Cruz County has been abolished through the tactics of both the planning department and now its helper, the Santa Cruz Land Trust. As indicated on this map, this next map, which is called the Conservation Lands Network. Remember that term, we're going to see it later in this talk. Areas covered in dark blue, all these areas in dark blue, are deemed critical biodiversity areas. Now, what that means, if you think back to the map that I've shown here for many, many years, Michael Kaufman's red and yellow map showing the United States, the red areas being off limits. Well, this is the Santa Cruz version of that map with specific parcels identified, the dark blue being the wildlands, the light blue being the corridors where limited activities will be allowed. And gee whiz, the green areas, by the way, are already government lands. The wildlands are affected there. So what we see in Santa Cruz is about 90% of the land is dedicated to one form or other of wildlands. It's no wonder that those people who are not on the inside with the county planning department can't harvest their trees, can't use their lands, because their lands have a different designation deemed for achievement during the 21st century. The land trust represents an ultimate public-private partnership in the Agenda 21 mode of advancing the Wildlands Network. Now, the Land Trust also has a list of over 100 so-called, this is what they call them, technical advisors. This is comprised of a cross-section of government officials, including planners, environmental organizations, insider landowners, and select business people. Call them the wannabe lords who think they hold the keys to the rest of the landowner's future. That's where we have devolved in this county, to the insiders and the rest of us. And most of the people who are insiders today will be kicked off the table as that table begins to shrink over time, because you've got to know that at the end, Agenda 21 is about controlling human society by a very few people, and the rest of us considered simply chattel. Land trusts and NGOs, non-governmental organizations, use conservation easements to limit human access to the conserved land by regulations that forbid specific uses like horses, ATVs, fishing, hunting, swimming, etc. The point that I'm making is that the transit corridor plan and the rail purchase are land use and with land use control devices that give us a more, will all combine, give us a more complete picture of the globalist political assault upon Santa Cruz. They want us out of our cars and onto mass transit as we live out our smart growth, live in our smart growth bastions, which we could kind of visualize as looking like this cartoon. The people jammed into the little prisons with everything outside open for the animals to roam freely. As Stan introduced me, he made mention of my land in La Selva Beach, which we call Liberty Garden. And in the context of Santa Cruz, I'm going to bring that up just briefly here. Now, Liberty Garden is located in hilly terrain west of Highway 1. If you think back to that land trust map with the dark blue figures, the only area in the developed sections of Santa Cruz, from South County borderline all the way up to north of Santa Cruz, the only blue area on the ocean side of the freeway is me. I wonder why they chose me. Well, Liberty Garden is located in hilly terrain west of Highway 1. Liberty Garden is a prime example of how ecological restoration can thrive. We spent 26 years, bought it in 1985, 26 years creating a native plant environment, the likes of which do not exist in California. Gee, Shaw must be a hero of the planning department and the Santa Cruz Board of Supervisors because he did what they've been talking about for decades. It hasn't worked out that way. In 1986, half of Liberty Garden land was weed-infested and grazed by cattle. The other half was inaccessible due to walls of poison oak. This is the land in 1986. In fact, it was on my wedding day, which is why it looks festive. But let me tell you, to walk, you know, it was mowed up into this little table. The party was over here on the other side. But we had to mow paths to get to this because you couldn't walk through this. It was not a native plant. This is all thistles and burrs of European grasses, etc. This is in May, and literally you would have to wear plastic pants to walk through this. Very obnoxious plants. Now, without planting a single plant, but by nursing an ancient seed bank, by controlling the European weeds, without being there, you don't get a full appreciation from this picture, but every plant you see here in the foreground and in the background is a native California bunchgrass with wildflowers that pop up from time to time. This transformation has occurred nowhere else. It is a pure native grass environment. Well, County Planning Department doesn't like that. Here again is something taken probably in the early 90s. This is the Valley area. It had been a dump site before we bought it. It looks very pretty. Again, this is the month of May, but there's not, everything in here is a European weed grass, and by August it becomes very uncomfortable to be there. Today I can tell you that there's probably 50 varieties of native plants growing in that same land. Small portion of it with native California irises growing in front of that same facility. You know, what we're picturing, the second picture is right in this area. And so the transformation has been complete. Here are other areas, riparian areas that are typically strangled with poison oak and bramble. You know, we've cleared that, and now all these plants are special native everlastings and rushes and sedges, etc., the likes, again, of which you just don't find. And here's some grass areas taken in the fall. They don't look very attractive right now, but I can tell you that the nice thing about native plants is that they're always comfortable to human occupation as opposed to the European plants that dominate the California landscape today. And so here's some more showing a little more greenery earlier in the seasons. Government policy is not about protecting the environment. If that were the case, I wouldn't be a villain downtown. I guarantee you that I am. What the environmental movement is all about is about grabbing land and abolishing private property. And at that, they are succeeding. Today, I can say with absolute assurance, the County Planning Department on land, this land is zoned for 29 houses. It's been that way for decades and decades. It's why I bought the property. 29 houses it's zoned for. I can't build one. Maybe you could. I can't build one. I can't build one because of Agenda 21 policies existing in Santa Cruz today. I'm a dark blue parcel on that map. So 4 years ago, I said, well, let's just test them. Let's see if I can build one house on 74 acres, zoned for 29 houses. Ask Ellen Perry. I can't. You see, it is the Agenda 21 policies directed in this county by the ICLEI organization that makes that case the point. Now, I noticed Miss Perry several months ago of what's called a misprision of treason. I'm going to describe that a little bit later as we move into the Bay Area, and I'll even show a tape of a misprision. Now, if you want to know more about that or about Liberty Garden generally, we have information at our Freedom Advocates table. Let me ask, how many people in this audience live in the San Francisco Bay Area, one of the 9 counties there? Okay, and how many are from Santa Cruz County? Okay, so between those two areas, we've got a pretty good collection. I'm now going to change focus to the Bay Area Agenda 21 program. And to do that, you've only got to really talk about one thing. It's called One Bay Area. How many people know about One Bay Area? Okay, well, a few San Franciscans do. Everyone needs to know about it because One Bay Area is the prototype Agenda 21 program coming down from the federal government that will infect every metropolitan area in the United States. It's just they're using the Bay Area as their original prototype. One Bay Area is a new initiative meant to coordinate the efforts amongst the region's 9 counties and 101 towns and cities to create a more sustainable future. A consortium of regional agencies, watch that word again, the Association of Bay Area Governments, ABAG, that's the big dog. The Bay Area Air Quality Management District, another regional outfit. The Bay Conservation and Development Commission, and the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, much like our own RTC here in Santa Cruz. One major effort now underway by these organizations is development of the Plan Bay Area, the region's long-range plan for sustainable land use, transportation, and housing, all designed to completely neutralize the idea of local government in America. Plan Bay Area is the Bay Area's primary Agenda 21 guidebook, just like the local Agenda 21 guidebook that infests Santa Cruz. And anybody from Santa Cruz who hasn't seen that book, the Agenda 21 Santa Cruz book, we've got it at our table, and you need to look at that. Now, these guidebooks are always made to look benign, but you can come to understand their meaning of terms, and you can monitor their programs. And then you can ask yourself, what can I do about this? Let's take a look at One Bay Area. They call it a new kind of plan. The Bay Area Plan is one of our region's, there's that word again, most comprehensive planning efforts to date. Changes, where did it go here? Change is coming. The Bay Area Plan, you are invited to participate. When it comes to creating sustainable communities, housing and transportation go hand in hand. That's a key comment right there. We'll come back to it. So what are sustainable communities? Well, it's stack and pack. Where people want to live. What if you don't want to live there? Where people live, work now and in the future. All within the confines of your narrowly defined smart growth region. Think back to that cartoon. One Bay Area, equity. You've heard me talk before. You know the dangers of the word equity. Is a central component of sustainability along with economy and environment. Well, that's the 3 E's, which we've talked about many times. Because together, those terms, they say it themselves, define the 3 E's of, not Agenda 21, they call it, of regional planning. Of course, Agenda 21 and regional planning are synonymous. They go on to say that 97% of all new households to be built in the Bay Area will be accommodated in already urbanized areas. Anyone here of Stack and Pack? And particularly in cities where residents have access to frequent public transit services, meaning that cities won't be allowed any population growth unless they have these transit service areas. Under this scenario, 70% of everything built over the next 20 years, or 630,000 new households, will go into places that have been designated as close to transit by local jurisdictions. It's bad news for anybody who wants to live in single-family housing. That's bad news for suburbs, because what it really means is that suburbs are no longer going to get city services. You're going to be in Stack and Pack, or you're going to be left out in the cold. And that's what you're paying taxes for, in order to create this new world environment. Nearly $250 billion has been dedicated by the federal government to One Bay Area's implementation. This will be funded through a regional Soviet called ABAG. How many people have heard of ABAG? Okay, here in Santa Cruz, Monterey area, our organization is called AMBAG. ABAG is the Association of Bay Area Governments. AMBAG is the Association of Monterey Bay Area Governments. Not every regional COG, these organizations, ABAG and AMBAG, are COGs, or councils of government, which means a federalized funding mechanism to create the Agenda 21 protocol. Now, One Bay Area employs public-private partnership economics at every turn. This development will bring the end of free enterprise and private property. Let's reflect on the globalist vision. It's government-controlled housing, getting people out of their cars, comprehensive control over human action, while jamming people like sardines to make them into the new man, a reinvented, old-fashioned serf. This is all in accordance with Agenda 21 sustainability policies and objectives. The globalist trap that has been set runs wide and deep. We must keep the defense up, and you are needed in that task. I'm going to come back to something I talked about in the context of Santa Cruz, and that is the Conservation Lands Network. We're going to find out that wasn't simply a Santa Cruz idea, even though it was promulgated by the Santa Cruz Land Trust. Because here's the Bay Area's Conservation Lands Network. The dark blue areas are to be dedicated to biodiversity goals. The green areas are already owned by government. And the map indicates the smart growth bastions around the bay and a few other spots in the broader Bay Area landscape. Now, we can see, I'll just remind you of the Santa Cruz map. It looks a lot like this. It's the same color scheme, and it's the same title, the Conservation Lands Network, for Santa Cruz. We had the Bay Area and Santa Cruz. If we go back to the Bay Area, you notice that what they're really doing is taking the northern section of the central coast of California, from Sonoma County along the coast all the way down to San Mateo, but they want to include Santa Cruz because the Santa Cruz Mountains are an extension of the San Francisco Peninsula. And so that's why our mapping, regionalism again, our mapping coincides with the Bay Area's mapping. Now, the Conservation Lands Network, they claim, has many people and organizations contributing. Well, there are plenty of organizations. As my friend Rosa Corey says, they got 6 organizations run by 3 people. But we shouldn't take that too lightly, because there's tons of money. There's all the power of government behind these organizations. And they do have a lot of silly drones doing their busy work for them. The partners include, this is the list from the Conservation Lands Network. The first listed is the Conservation Blueprint for Santa Cruz County. And then these other organizations I don't have time to talk about, but there's plenty of speeches in the Ultimate War series at Freedom Advocates you can find on our homepage that will go into a lot of these organizations that are mentioned here. I'm going to switch just a little bit and move into the rural aspects of the Bay Area Plan. The Bay Area Open Space Council. You see, the goal is to take these open spaces that are to surround the entire Bay Area and collectivize them. That is, take them out of private ownership, away from the notions of private property, in order to implement the Wildlands Network. It is my expectation that Bay Area Open Space is the project designed to take millions of Bay Area acreage and put it and make it devoid of human presence. This is the wildland status. Now, the regional government will facilitate, the regional government, which is ABAG in the San Francisco Bay Area, will facilitate this land grab and amass these millions of acres in the Bay Area to be converted to either government, NGO, or foundation land. This land will be wildlands and thereby off limits to the citizens of the Bay Area. That's the big picture. Agencies and NGOs or foundations will also gain control over rural land through the implementation of regulations, taxes, and fees. Often, land will be condemned directly by government or condemned for the benefit of public-private partners. Conservation easements are being used to tie the landholders into knots. Citizen ownership of rural land has sucked dramatically over the last several decades, many having been targets of this new order. Understand that the plan of the Open Space Council is to create the corridors through the Bay Area that connect the Sierras to the coastline for the benefit of species other than humans. This is called connecting communities, in their words. Let me flash back and give you some of the latest on the One Bay Area plan. When this very comprehensive plan rolled out late in 2011, there was in the Bay Area massive citizen objection to the One Bay Area program. But this massive objection, what they did is they held their little seance meetings in every county of the Bay Area, standard consensus, garbage that we've seen here in Santa Cruz for a decade now. But the citizens showed up. These meetings weren't advertised, but a group of citizens found out about it, and they appeared at every county's meetings, and they busted every consensus. We've got a lot of those videos up at Freedom Advocates. They're wonderful because they teach you how success can be had against these kinds of forced down your throat dynamics. Well, that was the good news. The sad news, but not surprising, is it hasn't adjusted the activities of ABAG in one iota. What we now know is that ABAG has officially adopted its land use and transportation plan that links the two, transportation and housing, and seeks the establishment, this is what ABAG is going to be pushing this year, the establishment of a 10-cent per mile tax, 10 cents per mile tax on auto use. Think back to Henry Baker's statement, we'll use a stick if we have to. Rezoning will be required by ABAG. They have that power. If your city is a member of ABAG, ABAG can tell you how you have to zone. And what ABAG is now saying is we will require to cause, remember I'd said 70% within half a mile of the transit corridor, stack and pack, 70% of all development within half a mile of the transit corridor. Well, they've revised that, given the objection that they found. It's now 90%. 90% of development has to be within the planned development area, or PDA. That means walking distance to the public transit system. Now, when I go to other cities and I see how they're building this stuff, in Chicago, for instance, massive mid-level stack and pack, all with no parking lots, no garages, no street parking. That's where we're all headed. Now, to do the One Bay Area, they've got to do an EIR, Environmental Impact Report. Well, it's amazing when government has to do this, how they can just ram it through. The EIR report on One Bay Area drew public comment, plenty of public comment, from some people who are really organizing in the San Francisco Bay Area. If you are not, if you are in the Bay Area and you're not familiar with them, we'll talk more about what you can do to become involved in the San Francisco Bay Area's objection to this as we move along. But the EIR report ignored these well-articulated and researched objections. Instead, as AMBAG is now preparing its next onslaught of the One Bay Area plan for later this year, the following is happening. Waivers are already being granted to favor developers who will build the stacking packs. Cities, though, are rejecting their housing allocations. That's some good news. Corte Madera has withdrawn from ABAG to avoid their rules. That means you get no federal money. That's a big move. That's a move that every city needs to take. We'll talk more about that in a bit. One Bay Area policy now holds no permits or city services to be granted outside of city limits. You know, I go driving up in Sonoma County. You go on these country roads, and the bramble is growing halfway into the driving lane. Nobody maintains the roads. If it's not part of the urban center, it's just being abandoned. You see, the steamroller rolls on. Citizen response must grow even bigger so that they can't continue to ignore people's wishes. So what can an American citizen living in the Bay Area, or for that matter anywhere else, do? Well, we've got to begin by making sure you understand the nature and objectives of Agenda 21 programs, and I just suggest you visit freedomadvocates.org and direct your study. But then I think two strategies will emerge as to what it is that American citizens must do now if our way of life as a free people is to be protected. 1, kick out ICLEI. How many people know about ICLEI? Okay, that's why I knew I didn't have to talk about it today. But let's talk about kicking ICLEI out. Now, ICLEI is the International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives. It's now also called Local Governments for Sustainability. The city of Santa Cruz was one of the first members of ICLEI in the United States. This is the most vulnerable globalist organization operating in America today, simply because they are an international UN partner working under contract with local governments and your regional Soviets or Council of Governments. Now, ICLEI wrote the Local Agenda 21 Planning Guide. Any of you who do not know about ICLEI, you can get a lot of information at freedomadvocates.org, and I suggest you go and find it out. If you don't understand ICLEI, you're not understanding how it is that Agenda 21 has swarmed America. ICLEI is a worldwide organization, and here are their offices. Their world secretariat is in Bonn, Germany. Now, how is it that the city of Santa Cruz signs a contract for policy implementation with a foreign NGO based in Bonn, Germany? Well, Article 1, Section 10 of the United States Constitution makes the following prohibition. Quote, "No state shall enter into any treaty, alliance, or confederation with a foreign political power. Neither may a city." So we've got to ask ourselves, is it treasonous for city or state leaders to contract with ICLEI, an international NGO accredited by the United Nations for purposes of implementing Agenda 21 and for their participation in a world congress? Yeah. ICLEI contracts are treasonous. So what do? Well, we've got to begin by letting elected officials know about Agenda 21. We need to show them how they are implementing Agenda 21. Now, this is John Bush that I'm about to show you a video of in the city of Austin, Texas. What I like about John is he's a young guy. He really gets it. and let's see what he does with the city of Austin. This is an 8-minute video that's been cut down 3 minutes. If you want to see the whole thing, you can find it at Freedom Advocates. Whoops.
21. Amongst the stated objectives of Agenda 21 is the rewilding of America through the Wildlands Project. This project would remove human beings from over half of the land in America and deem these areas core wilderness zones. Regardless of where your family farm once was, human beings will not be allowed to set foot in these areas. There would also be highly controlled and monitored buffer zones around these areas in which travel would be severely limited. Finally, humans would be forced to live in compact, futuristic cities full of skyscrapers where travel is controlled and tracked. This is what the eventual culmination of smart growth is going to look like. It sounds crazy, I know. I was just as dubious when I first heard about it too. However, upon reading their own documents, it turns out that it's all true. It's called the Wildlands Project, part of Agenda 21. I suggest you all look into it in detail because you're about to pass an ordinance that's beginning the process. The point of sale ordinance is part of the Austin Climate... What I thought was really crazy, however, is that the Mayor's Climate Protection Program is furthering the implementation of Agenda 21 here in Austin. And we're about to vote on it here. So here's the connection between the point of sale ordinance and Agenda 21. Very interesting stuff. And again, I highly recommend reading Agenda 21. The point of sale ordinance is part of the Austin Climate Protection Program. Mayor Wynn didn't just come up with this wonderful plan off the top of his head. It's Austin's version of the U.S. Mayor's Climate Protection Agreement, which came out of the U.S. Conference on Mayors Climate Protection Summit in February 2005. The summit was hosted and funded by the International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives, a United Nations organization. Funded by tax-exempt institutions such as the Rockefeller Brothers Foundation and the Carnegie Foundation, the International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives is the primary group that has been driving the implementation of Agenda 21 at the local level. And this is from Agenda 21, Chapter 28. Because so many of the problems and solutions being addressed by Agenda 21 have their roots in local activities, the participation and cooperation of local authorities will be a determining factor in fulfilling its objectives. So basically, many of the tenets in the Mayor's or the Austin Climate Protection Program have their origins in Agenda 21, which I see as a globalist push to use environmentalism as a means of global control. It sounds like an Orwellian conspiracy theory, I know. It's funny because we now have a regional secretariat of the United Nations for the International Council on Local Environmental Initiatives, and it's called the ICLEI Oceania, and that's, of course, the name for one of the regional bodies in 1984. Now, I know it's kind of creepy that the aspects of a suppressed 1992 UN document, which if executed would greatly diminish the national sovereignty of the United States, are being voted on right here, right now, but I also feel that the prospect of government punishing its citizens if they do not complete a mandatory audit and disclose all historic energy use to the city, the buyer, and eventually to an international body, this is how it starts. Slowly but surely, it sounds like a good thing, but now pretty soon we'll be giving up even more of our sovereignty. I believe that this violates the core essence of private property, which is a major tenet that this country was founded upon. Also, it seems to be the sentiment of some on the council.
Well, needless to say, that issue that John was objecting to was then voted on by the Austin City Council and approved 7-0. So just because you go before the board doesn't mean they're going to roll over on you. But it needs to be done again and again and again. And eventually we need to elect different people to take different policies towards this. But as long as we sit on our hands and say, oh, Lord save us. Well, we need Lord's help, but He helps those who help themselves. And if we do not cause our elected officials to become responsible for what they're doing, like John Bush is doing here, we're going to get what they're going to deliver to us. So we need to tell them about Agenda 21. I'm going to show another example of that happening here in the Bay Area. This is Rosa Corey, who spoke first at, I think, about 30 people who spoke at the San Carlos City Council in respect to an ICLEI issue that came up on their agenda. And let's watch what Rosa has to tell the San Carlos City Council.
Good evening. I'm Rosa Corey. I'm the Executive Director of the Post-Sustainability Institute. And I'm glad to be here tonight. It's an important night because we're drawing something out of the shadows. And it's important to talk about it. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's a conspiracy fact. This is Agenda 21. This is the United Nations plan. It's a 300-page, 40-chapter plan. And ICLEI was created in 1990, prior to this plan's adoption, to implement United Nations Agenda 21 Sustainable Development worldwide. Sustainable development is a term that was defined by the United Nations, and all of these terms come out of the United Nations. Smart growth is part of United Nations Agenda 21. Your general plan elements are designed in accordance with United Nations Agenda 21 principles. Its language is in your 2030 general plan. Your planners were trained in it. The flyer that we gave you over there is from Local Agenda 21 Planning Guide. It's a joint ICLEI and United Nations book, and it is used in your planning department, the planning department for San Carlos. This plan is a whole life plan. It involves the educational system, the energy market, transportation system, the governmental system, healthcare, food production, and more. The plan restricts your choices, it limits your ability to govern yourself, and it takes away your freedom. This seems like a rhetorical statement, but it really is not. This is actually what this plan does. And using the cover of environmental concern, our private property rights and our civil rights have been diminished, and they will continue to be so unless we call a halt to it. One of your residents has purchased some of I wrote a book. It's called Behind the Green Mask, UN Agenda 21, and he purchased these books for you, and I have provided them for you here. I want you to know that, ICLEI is the International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives, but it changed its name so that you wouldn't know that it's international. It seems like all of these things seem like they sound so good. Sustainable development, green, vibrant, walkable, bikeable. How could you be against that? But really, when you know about this plan, it is really very serious, and I urge you tonight to sever your relationship with ICLEI.
Now, San Carlos did not sever its relationship to ICLEI. The vote was 4-1. But I think the pressure that can be brought upon every ICLEI city in the Bay Area, and there are dozens and dozens of ICLEI cities in the Bay Area, can be brought to bear such that we begin to turn that game. And if you live in the Bay Area and want to join into that effort, contact us or the other organizations that are working hard to cause the One Bay Area program to be abandoned. Now, when you've done these steps and your city council just continues to ignore you, there is another step that can be taken. And it's using that Article 1, Section 10 of the U.S. Constitution that prohibits your city from doing exactly what they're doing, combined with a statute in California that dates to 1850. It's called Misprision of Treason. It's California Penal Code number 37. And we have a video here that shows a misprision being delivered. The harassment that I've received in my operation of Lockaway Storage is indicative of policies that call for the abolition of private property. This objective is a cornerstone of Agenda 21 Sustainable Development Blueprint, which has been adopted by Alameda County through its membership in ICLEI, the International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives. This is an international NGO formed for the purpose of localizing the UN's agenda for the 21st century. You all have a sheet here that identifies the members of ICLEI, and you'll see number 2 on that list is Alameda County. Here is the UN's Earth Summit Agenda 21, the UN's program of action. And here's the planning guide, the local agenda planning guide. The copy of the cover is in your packet. This is an introduction to sustainable development planning that's been prepared by the ICLEI organization. The purpose today is to follow up on my delivery to each of you of a misprision of treason. The purpose of a misprision is to provide you information necessary for a reasonable person to know that their actions have been treasonous. My primary purpose today is to help you understand why and how your commitment to the ICLEI organization violates Article 1, Section 10 of the U.S. Constitution. This section provides that no state or its subdivisions can enter into any treaty, alliance, or confederation with a foreign political entity. There is no statute of limitations associated with the violation of this section. ICLEI's North American headquarters is located just blocks from here. The world headquarters are in Bonn, Germany. ICLEI uses climate change and biodiversity as the excuse for an attack on private property and more. Many municipalities around the country have terminated their contracts with ICLEI as people are becoming aware of the philosophical underpinnings of the ICLEI organization. As Mr. Haggerty knows, ICLEI also plays a gigantic role within the local regional cog known as ABAG. ABAG, recently led by Mr. Haggerty, has hatched the One Bay Area plan. Your constituency needs to understand that One Bay Area is the local version designed to herd people in dense stack and pack communities surrounded by empty space that was once private property. Measure D, the subject of my company's lawsuit, denies rural landowners the natural or unalienable right to the use and enjoyment of property. This type of legislation is the cornerstone upon which Agenda 21 is predicated. The public is coming to understand this. I have previously delivered my organization's Freedom Advocates core pamphlet, Understanding Sustainable Development Agenda 21. I request a little more time so I can get to landscaping issues.
I haven't stopped. Well, you're going to get about 30 seconds.
This information has been given to you to help meet the information required by the misprision statute. If you believe you can defend your county's relationship with ICLEI against charges of treason and offer the opportunity to publicly debate the issue, your constituency deserves nothing else. The overall good news is that there is a light beginning to shine on ICLEI. ICLEI represents a pattern of governmental infiltration in America. As the light begins to shine, local officials begin to show which side of this great battle they are on. So far, you got a 5-0 vote for Agenda 21 from the Alameda Board of Supervisors, 4-1 in San Carlos, and 7-0 in the city of Austin. We're not winning those battles yet, but you got to show up if you have any chance of winning, and showing up again and again and again is the lesson we've learned in prior Agenda 21 battles. Now, contracts with ICLEI guarantee implementation of the international political and economic policy at the local level. Drive city alliances with ICLEI out of the communities surrounding you. Now, you can find out what cities are ICLEI cities by going to Freedom Advocates, looking at our ICLEI primer. There's a link there that links up to all the cities that ICLEI advertises to be its members. The number of communities with citizens working to remove ICLEI is expanding as citizens begin to tie the links between ICLEI and Agenda 21. ICLEI has lost 30% of its members to American citizens' pushback in the last year. Again, I recommend you visit Freedom Advocates' website to learn more about ICLEI, to learn more about Agenda 21, with particular attention you might give to the ICLEI primer and the misprision of treason primer, and then get started on kicking ICLEI out. Now, the second strategy I'm going to suggest for battling Agenda 21 is even bigger and far more important. It is about exposing the cog. The AMBAG, the ABAG, the SCAG down in Southern California. Virtually every square inch of America is covered by cog governmental management. Local governments have no power in this country anymore because the cogs have it all. I'm going to start my discussion of COGS by giving a very short snippet of one of the Bay Area meetings held late last year. The leader against the One Bay Area program is the woman who started the East Bay Tea Party. Now, this is not an ordinary GOP Tea Party. This is a real Tea Party made up of American people with real American objectives so they can talk about Agenda 21. Again, her name is Heather Goss, and she has trained a contingent of people in the Bay Area. If you're not one of them, you want to become one of them, to do what it is that they did so successfully in battling every one of ABAG's One Bay Area meetings held last year. And here's just a snippet of Heather at one of those early meetings in 2011.
And I have a problem with us telling people that they can't build on their own property. That is a problem. It's private property. It's part of that's part of our constitutional values for people to have and be able to do whatever they want with their own private property. And for us to sit here and say they can't use their own property and you're calling it open space is somebody's private property. I have a really big problem with that.
Right, so the comment is...
I wouldn't want someone to tell me when I buy a piece of property that I can't build on it.
Right, so the comment is, how can we tell people that own a piece of land... that own a property that we can't build on it or we are going to build on it? How can we make those decisions? And that's really one of the toughest things about regional planning is that we have a whole group of people here who may or may not want to be conserving open space and essentially meaning that...
property rights.
Well, there you go. You know, this fella is saying, gee, some people may not be for our confiscation programs. We're going to have to work that through. The concept is that people who are running ABAG and who are leading these little seance meetings have no respect for private property, have no respect for human life, and have no respect for the American ideals. And if we don't show up at their meetings, what will happen is what happens in Santa Cruz. It's stamped, it's done, it's approved by the Board of Supervisors, and it happens. Just watch the Soquel corridor begin to take shape as those meetings happened this last week. And it will happen whether we show up or not, but if we show up, the battle begins. If you don't show up, it's a whitewash. You won't win just by showing up, but we've got no chance if you don't. So it's a matter of American citizens having to stand up, take action now, or forever hold your peace as your children become either non-existent or chattels of the state. So the real mission isn't just to expose the COG, okay, which the people fighting with the East Bay Tea Party did very effectively last year. The real mission is to get your city to withdraw from the COG. Remember, ABAG and AMBAG are COGs. They are the engines from the federal government with the money from the federal government that is funding almost all of this. Again, creating the circumstance for the collapse of the American dollar. Now, to understand how our constitutional government is being transitioned to one of globalized central control, let's examine regionalism so that we know what it is and why it is that we must draw from the COG, or the Council of Government. Regionalism is the American political structure being transformed. This has occurred now for more than 50 years without public awareness of the mechanisms underlying this change. Today, the effect of a communitarian philosophical approach to government dominates public expectations and legislative agendas. At the core of this transformation is the political process of regionalizing the country. Political regionalism is the antithesis of representative government. Regionalism restructures or reinvents the operation of American government. Regionalism is the blueprint for your serfdom. It has infiltrated cities and counties everywhere, affecting your transportation, water, farming, and land use systems. Every aspect of government is being controlled to the regionalist operatives. Regionalism is being used to destroy traditional political boundaries such as county lines. Massachusetts has already abolished counties. It's all regional government on its face in the state of Massachusetts, and that's where Schwarzenegger wanted to move California. He didn't get us quite there, but essentially we're there anyway because the cogs control your city and county governments. Regionalism ushers in a transformed system of government that ultimately has as its design the abolition of private property. Now let's take an example showing how regionalism, or showing how Agenda 21 programs are brought into your town via regionalism. Now this is an excerpt from the United Nations Agenda 21 document concerning transportation planning. This is from the Earth Summit, Agenda 21, Chapter 7, Human Settlements. Promote urban transport systems in all countries where we should be taking a comprehensive approach to urban transport planning and management. To this end, all countries, we can say counties, should encourage development patterns that reduce transport demand. We certainly see that in Santa Cruz. You're seeing it in the Bay Area as well. Adopt urban transport programs favoring high occupancy public transport. Well, that's what the Diamond Lane is all about. That's what bus systems are all about. That's what light rail is all about. That's what bicycle paths are all about. That's what walkable communities are all about. We're implementing the Agenda 21 Human Settlement Program. Encourage non-motorized modes of transportation. Let's all move to Beijing, 1950. By providing safe cycleways and footways in urban and suburban centers. Well, your town is adopting these programs. This is because these systems are imposed upon locales by a regional level of government largely unknown and, when known, underestimated. Regionalism is an important political concept. Regionalism has overtaken the country. Now, according to the website of the National Association of Regional Councils, they proclaim themselves, this National Association of Regional Councils is called NARC. I always thought I knew what NARCs were, but the real NARC is the Regional Council Coordinator. They serve as the national voice of regionalism through effective interaction with the federal government. Well, sure, they're creations of the federal government. Dwight Eisenhower is the one who brought it to America, and Ronald Reagan is the one who brought it to California. You can see NARC's agenda includes just about everything. In addition to NARC, citizens must know about councils of government. What is a council of government? Well, they're called COGs. COGs are region-wide associations of local government. They are regional bodies typically defined to serve an area of several counties to address issues such as regional and municipal planning, economic and community development, cartography and government information systems, or GIS, hazard mitigation, emergency planning, aging services, water use, pollution control, transit administration, and transportation planning. And you thought local government had something to do. ABAG, the creator of One Bay Area, is a COG. Here in Santa Cruz, the COG is AMBAG, the Association of Monterey Bay Area Governments. Now, COGs are the instrument for restructuring American government. They are setting up an infrastructure for a new economic system based on public-private partnership to replace free enterprise. Regionalism promotes Soviet-style councils that develop policy that is then rubber-stamped by elected officials with no meaningful public oversight. When you elect a local official who is not fighting the COG, you are electing the wrong people. COGS are an extra level of government that operate outside the provisions of the Constitution, and that is why they are able to advance globalist objectives while insulating most public officials from liability or visibility. In fact, there is a whole system of councils, including COGS, that are directing your local government. When I say Soviet, I've defined that in prior years. Let me just say summarily that a Soviet is a system of councils that report to an apex council. They're designed to implement a predetermined outcome, and they do that typically through a process of facilitation. These are the consensus meetings you'll find all over town. They're going on right now regarding the Soquel corridor. They've been going on here for 2 decades. Now, Soviet is a hierarchical system of interconnected councils that work to destroy individual personality, suppress individual potential, and centralize power into the hands who seek to control human action and human production. Today, the American Soviet is dedicated to the implementation of Agenda 21. That means smart growth, implementation of the Wildlands Network, sociological indoctrination, and the use of technology to monitor and control our every action. The consequences of not withdrawing from the COG is that your area will become an outpost of the new transformed world system that regards ordinary human beings as chattel. Now, victories are built on strong defenses. Defenses that rely upon knowing the enemy. We can defend locally against Agenda 21 by knowing Agenda 21. That is the road to recovery, and recover we must. Fight to recover the political recognition of unalienable rights. If we do not, humanity will become managed and cold. Now, America was the exception to centralized government authority. That is our heritage. The foundation of America rests on the political recognition of each individual's natural or unalienable rights. Today, that recognition is lacking. Resurrecting that idea is why freedom advocates exist. Valuing life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, coupled with an honest monetary system predicated on the practices of a moral citizenry, produced a society where individuals were free to pursue their lives. The challenge today is how to restore that pursuit. So what is it we do? Personally, we need to run for local office, get the word out, or become active at resisting and reversing local missteps directed through Agenda 21. Locally, we need to withdraw from the COG. If you are in the San Francisco Bay Area, Santa Cruz, or the rest of the country, all COGs need to be withdrawn from. Hook up with a real American Tea Party, not a GOP misdirecting agent type. Now, Heather Goss heads up the East Bay Tea Party. And for those of you, particularly those living in the East Bay, I really suggest you get with her organization, go to her meetings on how to break down this consensus process, bust up the One Bay Area plan, because if you sit back and just let it happen, you will rue the day you did not take action. And within the state, we need to kick the federal government out of California. We need to restructure the tax arrangement between the citizens and the federal and state governments. We need to demand or establish a new monetary system as our dollar begins to collapse. It is time to recognize that the federal government is breaching the American pursuit. We are on a course that may require the breaking of the Union so that it may be reassembled when a national government can be formed that is ready to live up to the American premise. And that premise is that government power is limited and man is free. This call is for a return to the uniquely American commitment of politically recognizing every individual's unalienable right, including the right to life itself, to liberty, to the use and enjoyment of property, and to one's right to pursue happiness. Thank you.
Well, we have about 5 minutes for questions. Does anybody have any questions for Michael? Yes, go ahead. Chuck?
I just recently got hit with the local tax in Monterey County on paying for fire protection because I live in the suburb. This is slippery slope to what's going to be developing down the way that force me to try to get out and go back to the city because I can't afford to pay the outskirt taxes.
Absolutely. That kind of program is happening everywhere, and your officials know exactly what they're doing. They're trying to force people out of the outlying areas and into the stack and pack communities. Yeah, no, you're on to it there.
Orlean?
I was part of 4 different groups going to these various visioning meetings. I went to 4 different communities, and it was amazing how many of us were there, and we were in large number, and we essentially did everything Heather told us to do, and yet, like you said, they've ignored us, and they're just rolling through with us. What can we do now other than give them a misprision of treason?
Well, I think for the One Bay Area meetings that the public outrage just needs to ramp up. We defeated lots of things earlier on in Santa Cruz. They just come back and they do it another way. It's not until that there is a real anti-Agenda 21 movement in America before they're going to back off. And we're not to that point yet, but we're making steps all the time. People in here who've become aware of Agenda 21 over the last years need to begin doing things, causing more people to understand this, and taking action with regard to your local elected officials. And the change will come. It's not going to come easily. And those of us who've been fighting this for a while know that you don't go in and deliver knockout punches. That's not how this battle's fought.
We'll take one more question. Yes, Deborah.
Hi, Michael, thank you. My question to you is by executive order, the climate action plan is now being required to be approved nationwide in every city. And an example of that was the recent approval several months ago in Santa Rosa, where they acknowledge everything that ICLEI is. So whether ICLEI is kicked out or not, the climate action plan is now by executive order, and as you said, everything morphs. We try one avenue. I've been to all the meetings too that Heather has hosted, or many of them, I should say, and with Rosa, and things keep morphing, and it's zero to they usher them all in. So what do you know about the climate action plan?
Well, I think the broader issue that you raise is, when they duck from here and pop up over there, what do we do about that? And I think the answer is that in that specific, that just gives us impetus to sever the federal government. Okay? Now, that's not an easy step, not something we can do overnight, but the federal government, through the COGS, through executive orders, through its taxing policies, et cetera, through its land ownership, it's what I say is patently unconstitutional ownership of lands within a state by the federal government. These are all things that need to be undone by our state government. Now, where's our state government today? They are fully embedded into Agenda 21 policy. It is the most embedded legislatures in the country. Many state legislatures are outlawing ICLEI or outlawing Agenda 21, and actions began last year. They're accelerating this year, and that's good news. California is nowhere on this map. So What I always say is, you don't fight it from the top. You're not going to do anything in Washington, D.C. Every official in Washington, D.C. is an Agenda 21 agent. We're not going to, in this state, be able to fight it in Sacramento because every Sacramento official is an Agenda 21 agent. And it may be that every official in Santa Cruz is an Agenda 21 agent, but if us, combined with our neighbors, began to fight the Santa Cruz Board of Supervisors, we'd soon find ourselves in a new environment. And that's where we've got to start. We've got to do it at home and build up. We capture our city, we capture our neighborhood, our city, our county, and then we move on to the state. And at the end of the game, we'll deal with the federal government. And if we've got some federal executive orders that come our way, it's time to start defying them.
Thank you very much, Michael. And if we're going to take back America, we'll do it block by block and precinct by precinct and city by city and county by county and state by state, not from above. Well, we're going to have another 30-minute break, then we'll have one more speaker. Remember that Wendy's in the back there. She has the DVDs, and you can go back and pick up the DVDs of the talks today. They're ready. So we will adjourn for the 30 minutes, and we'll be back again.